I walked away from that date thinking we both thought that was a terrible date. In my mind, I'm like, I don't need to have this conversation. But yet then I'm so glad I did, because it would have left them in a standpoint of them being like, that was a great date. Why isn't he texting me? Why are we not going on another one?
I met this sweet couple. He felt that God told him that she was his future wife.
If you feel like God's saying you are supposed to be someone's spouse, what you need to do is pray for the position, not that God would open up someone's eye that you're the person.
Welcome back to the Dear Future Husband podcast. I'm your host, Christian. And here's the thing. I've been recording all day. It's one of those days where I was like, okay, we got one more. I gotta muster up the strength to do it. But we're doing it a little differently. We're doing it in bed because it's 9 p.m.
And because Arden normally goes to bed at 9 p.m.
You may fall asleep halfway through this episode. If you're watching us on YouTube, you will see that we are literally in bed. I feel like that's one of the first times I've heard literally used correctly.
There you go.
In the last week.
See, they get to sit in on our late night bed conversations, though.
Yeah. Which are usually...
Be normally just me snoring.
If you want to know what marriage is like, this is your in-depth look.
Yeah.
Your in-bed look, I should say.
That's right.
No, I actually wanted to have this fun conversation with you because one of the joys of this podcast is I get to interact with women that have real-time dating questions. They have like the awkward, how do I have the conversation when we're engaged? How do I navigate this in relationships? Or just, how do I have a first date? And it's one thing to get to have girl talk, and it's another thing to get to hear a guy's perspective, especially when it comes to the taboo or, I wish I knew what he was thinking, or I wish I had a decoder. What does he mean by this? And that's usually within those first few interactions. Like, is he interested? I don't know. What did this text mean?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really, first of all, Spitfire, is it really as complicated as we make it?
No.
Really?
No, not with guys. No, guys are, I mean, for most part, guys are normally very simple in their thinking in terms of like they're not overthinking or going so deep as women go super deep, that oftentimes I think the women are overthinking for the men, and men are kind of like, okay, some guys of course can play a game. Some guys are just, I don't play games. I'm interested. I might not know how to show I'm interested, but I am interested. And so comes across in different ways, and it does, I guess, at that point become almost a game, because then you're feeling like, well, I have to understand. I don't know if this guy's interested or if he just doesn't know how to express his interest. But that's when you get into the place of overthinking. But in a guy's mind, it's very normally simple and oftentimes straightforward.
It's not simple for the girl, but the guy.
And in his mind, it's simple. Yes.
So there is some decoding. And I feel like that more goes to not what is he trying to say, but who is he? Because I think when we're actually not overthinking and we're trying to give more the benefit of the doubt, that's when you're like, oh, yeah, maybe you should be thinking about this a little.
Yeah. And I think it boils down to the guy as well. Like if you've gotten to know this guy a little bit, and if he feels like, okay, maybe this isn't the best kind of guy, then yeah, probably there is some wrong thinking that you're going to have to decode there. But if it's a man that is, I'm true to my word, I believe what I say and I say what I mean kind of thing, then what he's giving off of the vibe of what he's saying, he's truthful with those things. He's not just trying to put on a facade. He's not trying to...
in other areas besides just what he said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. And so it's not so much that you need to dissect it in a way.
Yeah. I love it because this reminds me of our other episode. I think the first one I ever brought you on for, and it was, are we dating wrong as Christians? Like, when are we making it more complicated? Are we being clear with our intentions? I will link that here if you want to hear more of that type of conversation. But specifically, what I want to ask you directly from the women that are a part of this community is, okay, maybe he's clear with his intentions. Maybe he's like, you hung the moon, you're the most beautiful goddess I've ever seen. I want to take you out, but you're already like, it's kind of a no for me. Or I've been on the first date and I've understood it is a no for me. I think what women want to know is, how do you kindly reject I hate that word.
See, and that's how Christian asked me to be upon this podcast. Is she said, "Can you talk about rejecting people?"
We just call
know that
right.
this is your favorite.
We have different
series.
scopes on this.
It's like, wow, okay, of course. So from a female perspective, though, that part is interesting. I see it from a very much the same point of how
a female would do in that situation.
Yeah, because I mean that's kind of how I'm seeing it. I mean, I remember when I was going on dates, I always felt like if I went on a date, even if it was just a first date, I owed that person some kind of follow-up conversation. And it was never something that was supposed to just be, okay, great, we had a good time, it was enjoyable. Now, if it was like, hey, we went out to coffee and it's just a simple get to know you, they don't need to have a follow-up conversation. But if it's like hey, we're going out to dinner, we're going to do something else, and it feels a little bit more of elaborate first date. Yeah, like let's just see what's going on here. Then you owe that person some kind of explanation at the end. Yeah, and so from a female perspective, I think it's similar to what I think every guy should do, where it's just you have a follow-up conversation and you don't do the whole, okay, great, yeah, I had fun tonight, and then I'm not going to text you for 1 week or 10, however long, or never again, or I'm going to slowly stop responding back to your texts, and I'm going to stop doing engaging conversations over text. I think it's just simply having a phone call. And I'm thinking back to the last time I had that conversation was
with me,
not with you. See, we never had that conversation. That's why we're here. But it was like, I think it was 2 or 3 days removed from the date. And
first date or second date?
It was first date, but I had been talking with this person leading up to it probably for like a month. And then we went on a date and just didn't click on the date. And, got time together and just realized, okay, we don't click. And it was a fun date and we had a good time, but just didn't see it happening in that way. And so I remember I had that conversation where I was driving the car and I was like, I owe this person a conversation. And to me, that's a conversation you don't want to have. It's an uncomfortable conversation. But the thing is I think there's levels to maturity to be able to have those conversations and to be able to navigate that conversation in a good way of being able just to actually have it, I think is extremely mature by any person, whether they're male or female. And it's the right thing to do because ultimately you invested into that person, you gave some time. And so I remember I called that person, I said, hey, I don't feel like we actually connected. And I want to say this to you because I love, value the person that you are. I think you're a great girl, but I just didn't feel like it was there. And I don't want to drag this out. And that came out as a complete blindside to that person. I remember because she was like, oh, I actually thought we connected really well. But I'm glad in that moment that I had that conversation.
Yeah.
Because if I would have just been like, I walked away from that date thinking we both thought that was a terrible date. And we just didn't connect, didn't go deep. It just was not there. And so in my mind, I'm like, I don't need to have this conversation because nothing needs to be said. But yet then I'm so glad I did because I would have led that person continuing down, or I would have left them in a standpoint of them being like, that was a great date. Why isn't he texting me? Why are we not going on another one? Why isn't he asking me this? And so it just brought clarity to that situation. And all of those people that have had that conversation, well, it sounds like a lot. I've had a lot of this conversation, but those people, I'm not,
that was me.
There you go. But on great terms with a majority of them because you had the maturity to have that conversation. I will say for ladies, and that rejection conversation is a lot easier if things don't get physical on the first date.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Or even on And I think for a woman, even before we get into that part of the conversation, is we tend to think that kindness is the best thing that we can give someone following it didn't work kind of date, but it's not. Kindness is not the number one thing you need to aim for if you are leading to this isn't something I want to pursue. Clarity is the number one thing.
It's truth.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just clarity, because you're like, the confusion aspect, especially as a woman, like we can relate to this, so we wouldn't want to pursue this in any way or proponent. When there's ambiguity, that's when you begin to retrospect and think, well, what happened? You have to retrace the steps. What did I do wrong? Am I not enough? And so I think what we want to do is, in dating, we never want to let that fester, especially like you're saying, if it's avoidable. Like, it could have easily been something you skimmed over, but you're like, well, why not just let clarity? Why don't we lead with clarity following a date?
Yeah.
I think we're scared of that, honestly.
Yeah. And just doing the hard thing. Like, that is the thing within relationships, is it's always about doing the hard thing. And if you can't do the hard thing early on a first date, and just being able to navigate those awkward moments, well, it's not going to set you up well for going deeper into a relationship and going deeper into a marriage. And yeah, clarity is, like you said, it's always key. I mean, you think about it in a relationship with like a parent and a child. Like, if you lived in this place of constantly wondering, do I have my parents' approval? Like, that's an unhealthy place to be in. But yet, if your parents are, when you do that, that displeases me. Like, if you act out in that way, that displeases me. And it's understanding. I'm sorry, I'm trying to process this through like a toddler mindset, since we have almost 2 years.
Yeah, the day-to-day stuff.
It's like, for him, if he does something that he's not supposed to do, and I just don't bring clarity to it, and just kind of, but I know that's wrong, he's gonna either keep doing it, or he's gonna be confused when down the road I start getting frustrated with him because I didn't bring clarity earlier on. And I know that's a little confusing. Again, it's 2-year-old processing.
What I hear from that is, so maybe this person wasn't the one for you. And like, that's great. We're not going to set sail on the what if train, because that is dangerous. But maybe there is something where, let's just say this is a fictitious person that you had that conversation with. They didn't open up. And for the next day, maybe they say, oh, well, I didn't click. I didn't show the side of myself. The next day they could, and that could be their person. So it's like, even if it doesn't work out with you, kindness is actually being clear of, this is what I was looking for and didn't see, or it's not mixed with us. But you could actually be doing that person a favor of helping them. It is a learning. What you're saying, there's a learning curve with a toddler and the communication side. There's a learning curve with dating.
Yeah, it is very much so. And it's very helpful in that process to be able to just, again, have those hard conversations and navigate that rejection. And then don't flirt with it. That is one thing that I think is really key, is people want attention. And so if you know you have someone who is teeter-tottering on, well, I was attracted to this person, and for you is like, okay, I had this conversation, but then I'm going to just keep them hanging by. Like, that's doing no one any favors.
Like, I told them I didn't want to, but I'll still text them.
Yeah, like I none of those people that I had that conversation with, a week later text, hey, how you doing? Like, what are you up to?
So when you said you were on good terms with them, was there like
it'd be friendship? Yeah, like there was a break period, and then like specifically one of those people is I would go and spend time with a bigger friend group that we were all together, and was able to have fun time with that person without the concept or without the feeling of there's awkwardness here and there's uncomfortability. Now, of course, I'm speaking from my side of things, but it did not feel like that from the other person as well.
And to your point, I think that's because when you don't let things go physical or get confusing or let the
it's really easy to come back from that.
Well, yeah, I don't think you really can once it gets to that other point, because there is all these other layers on top of, like, when you do it from that point, you go in a date or two, maybe a few, and then you have the clear communication. It is easy to step back and say, okay, we're still friends. Yeah. But if we go in, we try to be cute, we kind of flirt. Maybe you're a woman listening and you're like, one day I'm kind of seeing this guy. I know he's not the one, or I don't feel good about it, but I'll just keep going around because I'm lonely, or because maybe, or because I enjoy getting to go on the dates. That's not going to serve either one of you well long term. That's not going to set you up well for the man that you do want to marry. So I just want to tell you, it is far better to make a clean break from that. Like, if let's just say, if we're selfish or we're single, if not for him, do it for yourself.
And I have a funny story about this. So you never know like what will happen to so that you do leave it in a good place. Because talking about leaving things in a good place is it was really funny. The last two girls I went on a date with before I met you, I was at a conference in Dallas.
Met?
What?
Met or
before we started dating, got serious. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, I'm not that. Yeah, that's a different story. But I was at a conference. We were married. I was at a conference in Dallas, and I was back in the green room, and I was trying to get a cup of coffee, and I turn around, and there was one of the girls with her husband, and I was like, "Oh, hey, like, okay," and we kind of had some awkward conversation, and I was like, "Well, good to meet you," to her husband. I was like, "All right, well, I gotta run," and I kind of
did you forget the coffee?
Well, yeah, booked it out of there in a panic, forgot my coffee, walk right out into the hallway to the other girl that I had previously gone on a date with right before the other girl. Like, I mean, it was probably like 3 months of time difference, but the last two girls that I had, and she was with her husband. So it's just funny. I was like, wow, the timing. And both of those girls had a conversation to clear things up afterwards. After we had gone on that first date. And I'm like, I'm glad I did not leave some of those things just unsaid, where it made that interaction, still a relatively awkward interaction, but it was a lot less awkward as it could have been.
What stands out to me too is like, you're an attractive man. I'm sure there's beautiful women. I'm sure there's beautiful, charismatic, charming women listening to this. I think what we also run the risk for ourselves is, even if like that one date you walked away, you didn't cross any lines, you felt like there's clear communications. If we let ambiguity sit in, like, you could have been perceived as, in that moment, like the Christian playboy. Like, you went on the dates with these two girls, you ghosted them, there's multiple in the same scenario, but because you had the clarity and because you had the character, it was slightly awkward, could have been really awkward if you didn't handle that well. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, that goes, maybe you go on a date with a guy, it's not there, but if you handle that well, say he has a friend later on down the road, he's interested in you, you're really interested in him, and his friend that you went on a date with could say, oh yeah, we went on a date, it didn't work out, but she's a great girl, versus, oh, she ghosted me, dude, you don't want to ask her out. So you never know who knows who. You never know the story that can be implied. You never know what your actions are saying to someone if you're not clearly communicating that. And albeit there's times where people can abuse that. Like, you can try your best, and if they don't hear it, or they have attached feelings overtly too much, but in our best efforts, let's just try to do what we can. Yeah. I have another anecdotal story from a listener. She went through this, had the good communication afterwards, like, hey, I just saw things perfectly out. Yeah. He said, oh, I hear you. Yeah, I agree. Let's just be friends. But like, really quickly, it was like, oh, hey, friend, I'm going to save you a seat at church, or we should get coffee.
Yeah, he's still trying.
He's trying to weasel in.
Yeah.
What does she do there?
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult because you kind of already...
Do you think that happens to women more than to men?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, that's difficult because for him, he's like, okay, I feel like I connected. And so now I still, like, I've got to win her over. And there's stories where people have been persistent, and it's eventually like they won them back over, and they go on a date and then they hit it off again. And so it's a difficult place.
A little slide to me.
Oh yeah, it's a difficult place to be in with that, where I think it's nice when there is maybe a little bit of break, of just a clear, like, hey, it didn't work out. And then you just kind of creating that boundary of, hey, look, I just think it didn't work out, and maybe we take a little bit of time before we really go back into friendship. And I think if a guy is continuing to pursue and continuing to try to, like, he's pursuing but trying to be a friend kind of thing, I think you just... I don't want to say you have to be honest and have that conversation again, but I do think there just needs to be a clear kind of cutoff point. And I remember going back a little bit, another time, just bringing up all past girl relationships.
Okay, I'm confident.
Is I was like, we're sitting in our bed, like, literally, but Yeah, but I remember I had a conversation, went on a couple dates with a girl, and then we just wasn't working out, and so had that conversation, felt like it went really great, and then exactly that happened where the girl just continued to keep reaching out, and for me, I didn't want to be mean, and I just tried to be as friendly as possible without making sure I was not doing anything that was leading her on. And it was like 6 months later, she was like, hey, can we have a conversation? And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, we can. And I had that conversation, and I remember it got really deep again. And it was, well, why aren't you interested in me? All these things. And was able to have that hard conversation. But then I remember it kept going in terms of 6 months later, she wanted to have another conversation. And I realized, like, even though I was unintentional or trying not to lead her on or anything like that, it was still almost keeping a little bit of hope for her. Yeah. And I remember actually talking to my mom about it and saying, hey, she wants to have another conversation. And my mom was like, you need to have that conversation. You owe it to her. And I remember I looked at my mom and I said, actually, I don't. I was like, I've had 2 hard conversations with her, and I've been very upfront about it. There's nothing new. And so I just said, hey, I'm so sorry, but I can't have that conversation with you. And that kind of put a clear end to it. And it's just unfortunate. Like, sometimes it will get to that point. And I think you have to just be as cordial as you can. But then if it gets to a point where it's just, sorry, but it seems like you're way too much attached to me from a relational, like, and hoping, yeah, like, I can't go further onto this. Like, if you want to say we're having another conversation, or if you want to just keep going and like, hey, let's as friends do this, like, you got to just have a clear cutoff. And even if you were super clear and upfront about that in that conversation, or felt like you were, it might still just need to be a clearer cutoff. And here's the thing, like, again, I think when you think about opposite sex relationships in terms of friendships,
I was just about to ask you that.
The friendships, they will not matter as much when you get married. And almost those friendships that are very good friendships and deep friendships that are authentic friendships that truly care about the betterment of you and not so much anything else, they will actually transfer over to your wife, and they'll become a better friend with your wife than they are with you. And so if that person is someone that
person is a new version of you, so they're gonna want to connect. They're not gonna feel like, oh, well, they're taking you away.
Yeah.
If they're like, oh, they're taking you from me, that shows you it was a different type of weaving.
Yeah.
What I was gonna ask you on that is, do you think we actually get caught in sticky places? Like, there's the trend going around on social media, which you're not on social media much anymore, so you probably haven't seen it, of like revealing to my opposite sex best friend that I like them, or just kissing them to see what happens. And people are surprised when you add a physical layer to a male-female dynamic that you've really emotionally or just over time cultivated so deep. They're like, oh, wow, we had a spark. To me, that's not a surprise.
Yeah.
Because if you perpetuate something to like a really deep level, whether it be like someone that, oh, I went on a date with and we can just be friends and we can have multiple heart-to-hearts and all this stuff, do you think we do ourselves a disservice by having so many guy and girl friendships, like not in the group setting like you were saying, but we're texting, we're calling, we're like, oh, that's my person I go talk to. To me, that's sticky.
I think it's very sticky. I think if you're saying in context of hanging out and like we got group hangouts and it was fun, we're close friends because we go through this, but if it's someone that I'm like, this is the closest person to me and this is my best friend, then yeah, that's a very sticky situation. Because you are creating essentially ties to that person that are going to be the ties that needs to be knitted between you and your spouse. And it's almost like you are filling in a gap with someone that is not supposed to be filled in that way. And now I'm not saying you can't have girl best friends. I just think or guy best friends. I just think it gets a little sticky. And especially if you're on a podcast like this, where you're thinking about your future husband, someday you are going to have a husband that is needing to be that person. And that other person, if they're not the person that turns into your husband, that other person can't be that person anymore. And I think as your husband or your wife steps into that position of your husband or wife in your marriage, they're going to want you to break that tie because they want that relationship with you. And so it just gets a little sticky in that. And so I like what you're saying of the whole trend of people just kissing. I'm just going to say this from a guy's perspective. If you have some kind of like emotional attachment to a person as a friend, and then you add a physical thing into that, yes, a guy is going to respond in that way. It's unfortunate, but that is probably normally going to happen. Now, yes, probably there's some cases in there where it's like, yeah, the guy was attracted to the girl and he just didn't think she was interested, and so he never made a move, and great, cool, that worked out. But that probably is better to talk about than just jumping right into a kiss, because again, a kiss is hard to come back from.
Right. Especially communicate after. So like, hey, so what did that kiss mean? Yeah.
No, I was just recording it and putting it on social media.
I saw you put the phone up. I was wondering what you were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll share one little story that happened to me over the last week of someone that I met. I think their story is unique to share here. Then Arden will go to bed.
I know. I already feel like my thoughts are all over the place because I'm tired and my eyes are like contact.
I met this sweet couple from South Africa through a friend, and we were just talking and sharing as we ladies do. And my friend that I do know said, you have to hear her love story. It's amazing. And I was thinking, they met in a crowded room and they were just drawn to each other. She's like, nope, I had zero interest in my husband for about 3 years. And he was into me the entire time. Yeah. But the way she shared it was really unique. She said, he knew that he was clearly interested in me. There was a point where he was praying, I don't know if for her specifically or just for his future. And he felt, people are going to shudder at this, but he felt that God told him that she was his future wife. Now, what he did here, I think, was the difference. He didn't go up to her and say, God told me you're my future wife, so figure it out. You have to be attracted to me. You have to love me now. He just kept that. And he said, I'm going to continue to pursue her in friendship. Kind of not like the other guy would say. I'm not going to be sly and try to weasel my way in. I'm just going to be patient. And if what I believe God said to me is true, then he will fulfill that. Mm-hmm. He'll make it known to her in the right timing. So he just continued to be a friend to her. Didn't confuse the line. Didn't try to push the agenda. And then one day she just said clearly she had this knowing that she had never had before. And I thought that was really incredible for, we can trust our peace. We can have clear communications. We don't have to try to hurry the timeline. We don't have to try to force something that's not there yet. Maybe God does work on your heart. Maybe there is something that changes, but trust where you are, especially if, like you said, you're mature, you're grounded, you have counsel around you.
I remember I actually got it where someone was writing me letters and they wouldn't tell me who they were. They were telling me all their story, and they're like, God told me, revealed this to me. And so I'm going to send you this many letters, and at the end of it, I'll reveal it of who I am. Yeah, it wasn't you.
I did write you letters.
It got weird. It got weird because the person was actually in a way stalking me. And they knew where I was traveling to, and their letters were basing off of that. So we actually had to reach out and say that she needed to stop. But I've had that come up a lot of times. And what I actually feel like God gave me the revelation of, if you feel like God's saying you are supposed to be someone's spouse, what you need to do is pray for the position, not that God would open up someone's eyes that you're the perfect person. And what I'm talking about is, if you're saying this guy is supposed to be my husband, you pray for that guy's future husband or future wife, and you pray over that position of that spouse in that man's life. And so that if someday you do step into that, you are stepping into your prayers. You're not praying that God, you would change his will. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, if you're saying, I truly love this person, if you truly care more for that person rather than I care more about me being with that person, rather than I care more about who that person is supposed to end up with, God is supposed to end up with, then I think that's a really, really good way to be able to pray into it without an agenda, without feeling like, God, if this doesn't happen, then your will is not, like, I'm not hearing your voice, or this isn't correct, or they made the wrong decision, and all these things. Because I think it gets a little messy there. And so you pray those prayers into the position of that person's spouse. And if that is you, you will step into those prayers.
And even it that will equip you to be the best wife to whomever that is that you are to be.
Yeah.
Or even the people that I like, well, I've been trying to date for a while. I want to be a wife, but nothing's working out. There is nothing lost on what comes from marriage of wanting to glorify God, wanting to be the best individual, wanting to nurture and protect people. None of that is lost on you if you don't become someone's spouse.
Yeah.
You can be that in friendship. You can be that in your family. I think that's one thing we think of. Well, it's so vain to pray for your future spouse, or like, well, what if it doesn't happen? I don't think it's vain, and I don't think you're right or you're wrong, or you're lost or you're forgotten if you're single. I think if we want to continue to be stewards of what God's placed in our heart and who he's called us to be, then we pray in such a way that we believe that he is good, that his word is true, and that he will lead us. So whether you're praying for the person you think might be your future spouse, the person you're hoping comes along one day, I want to encourage you to pray in such a way that you have faith and that you are open to whatever God says. And I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad you're part of this community. I would love to know what stuck out to you from this episode, how many more times you should get Arden on, because he is my favorite guest forever and always. If the bed conversation is fun, let me know, but I need you to leave a comment so I can hear your thoughts. And if you could leave a 5-star review, that will help us reach more women just like you that want to have other community and conversations around praying for your future spouse. See you next time.